Quick warning, this episode does cover some very disturbing and violent material, so viewer and listener discretion is advised. Well, hello. Welcome to Wyrd Wessex. My name is Andy.
And I'm Craig.
What are we talking about today, Craig?
Today, we are diving into the chilling tale of Amelia Dyer and the baby farm murders.
That's a particularly disturbing case, that one. I remember when it first made headlines.
You do?
According to your script, I do, yeah.
Yeah. So for this one, we're going to dive into our sources here. Is this book? I don't know how clear that is on my dark camera look, but it's by Angela Buckley. Victorian super sleuth investigates Amelia Dyer and the baby farm murders.
Grim stuff.
On a crisp March morning in 1896, bargeman Charles Humphreys and his mate were making their way along the Thames, towing a boat of ballast. As they approached Caversham near Reading, the river was a bustling hive of activity, with steamboats and barges transporting goods between London and the southern English towns. Suddenly, just a few feet from the shore, Charles spots a peculiar object floating in the water, and using a hook, he pulls the parcel onto the boat and carefully unwraps it. To their horror, they discovered a child's foot and part of a leg. Shocked and disturbed, Charles immediately ran to the nearest police station. Constable Barnett arrived promptly and placed the gruesome find into a sack. At the mortuary, the officer carefully unwrapped the parcel, revealing the body of a young girl aged between 6 and 12 months, swaddled in layers of newspaper and linen. A piece of tape was tightly knotted around her neck, and her eyes bulged, suggesting strangulation. The body had been weighted down with a brick, and fake writing was visible on the wrapping. A local surgeon examined the infant and confirmed the constable's suspicions. 2 days later, an inquest was held, giving the police time to gather more information and begin their investigation. The hunt for a murderer had begun.
On a further examination of the dried paper that had wrapped the infant, Detective Constable Anderson found a crucial clue. The package bore a Midland Railway stamp. The stamp, dated October the 24th, 1895, had originated from Bristol Temple Meads, indicating that the parcel had been sent from Bristol to Reading. However, the address on the parcel, Mrs. Thomas, 26 Piggott's Road, Caversham, turned out to be a false lead. Following up at the railway station, Anderson learned that the parcel was actually intended for a woman named Mrs. Amelia Dyer, who lived at 45 Kensington Road, not Piggott's Road. It's curious that the police didn't immediately head to Piggott's Road after discovering the address on the parcel. Perhaps they wanted to gather more information from the railway station before making a move. But at Mrs. Dyer's house, the officers discovered that she had recently left for London. A neighbour revealed that Mrs. Dyer obtained a piece of string on the previous Monday morning, which matched the string used to tie the bundle found in the Thames. This information led the police to place Mrs. Dyer under surveillance.
When Mrs. Dyer returned home, the police sent an undercover woman to pose as a potential foster parent. Mrs. Dyer agreed to meet with the undercover woman later that day, who would bring her a baby and £50, which is the equivalent to about £5,000 today. However, when Mrs. Dyer opened the door a little before 3 p.m, she was greeted by Constable Anderson instead. Mrs. Dyer was arrested and taken into custody, while officers conducted a search of her home. The search revealed a household of 7 residents, including Mrs. Dyer, an elderly woman known affectionately as Granny, 3 children, Nellie Oliver, Willie Thornton, and a 3-month-old infant, a lodger named Mrs. Chandler and her 2 daughters. The discovery of the infant in the Thames and the other residents at Mrs. Dyer's address raised further questions about Mrs. Dyer's activities and the potential involvement of others in the tragic case.
The search of Mrs. Dyer's home uncovered a trove of incriminating evidence. In the parlour, the police found a substantial amount of baby clothing, suggesting that Mrs. Dyer had been involved in caring for a large number of infants. Additionally, they discovered 15 pawn tickets, children's vaccination certificates, receipts from advertisement placed in various newspapers across the country, and some tape identical to that found around the baby's neck in the Thames package. Among the most disturbing finds were the letters that revealed the tragic stories of parents who had been forced to give up their children for adoption. These parents had unknowingly placed their children into the hands of a baby farmer, a person who would take care of the infants for a fee, often under unsafe and exploitative conditions. By carefully examining the letters, the police deduced that the child found in the Thames might be Helena Fry, the illegitimate daughter of a domestic servant named Mary Fry. Mary had handed over the baby on March the 5th, along with a payment of £10.
As the investigation continued, the officers became aware of a foul odour emanating from Mrs. Dyer's bedroom. Mrs. Chandler, the lodger, had previously complained to Mrs. Dyer about the smell, but Mrs. Dyer had dismissed it as coming from old clothes. However, when the police searched the bedroom, they discovered a large locked tin box that was the source of the stench. The box was empty, but it bore the unmistakable traces of having once contained a corpse. The day after her arrest, Amelia Dyer, a woman described by the press as powerfully built and of good height, appeared in court charged with the felonious killing of a child. When asked for her comments on the charge, she simply stated, "I do not know anything about it. It's all a mystery to me." Dyer was remanded for a week and sent to Reading Prison while the police continued their investigations.
Infant murders were not uncommon in this era. Unwanted babies were often abandoned, wrapped in rags or sacking, sometimes dead, sometimes alive, and frequently beaten or mutilated. These unfortunate infants were often left in deserted areas like rivers, canals, or poorly lit streets and back alleys. Concealment of birth and infanticide were two of the most common offences committed by women at the time. The former carried a sentence of up to 2 years in prison, while infanticide was punishable by death. With no state assistance for women with illegitimate children, their options were limited to charity-run orphanages, which often insisted on adoption. These institutions were often dangerously overcrowded, as exemplified by Mrs. Druitt's establishment in Tooting, London, which experienced a devastating cholera epidemic in 1849 that tragically claimed the lives of 180 infants.
In the Victorian era, women faced the heartbreaking choice of sending their child into workhouses and being separated from the children, or leaving them with baby farmers. Workhouses, though offering basic necessities, were often harsh and overcrowded. Baby farmers, while seemingly more humane, required significant fees, 5 shillings weekly or a £10 for adoption. Unfortunately, a network of unregulated baby farmers existed, trafficking children between themselves and sometimes selling them to childless couples. The use of aliases by both parties often made it impossible for parents to locate their children after they entered the system. With no oversight or protection for either babies or parents, these baby farmers were essentially human traffickers. Many of the nurses were far from honest, deliberately neglectful of the babies, in the hope that they might get sick and die from some illness or disease. To suppress appetites and keep children quiet, gin and opiates like laudanum, a substance now illegal but readily available to anyone in the 19th century. Due to high infant mortality, deaths by neglect often went unnoticed by the authorities.
A letter found at Mrs. Dyer's home implicated a 26-year-old accomplice named Arthur Palmer. A search of his residence revealed more baby clothing, 10 pawnbrokers' tickets for children's clothing, a bundle of linen. However, before authorities could issue a warrant for his arrest, even more disturbing discoveries would come to light. Chief Constable Tuesley ordered a thorough search of the Thames, the Kennet, and their tributaries for additional victims. On April the 8th, 1896, labourer Henry Smithwaite, while dragging the river near the site of the first discovery, pulled up a linen parcel. As it surfaced, the package burst, revealing a brick and a body so decomposed that the head fell off, floating out of reach. An examination at the mortuary determined that it was unclear whether the child had died before being placed in the river, but the child, a boy of just a few weeks old, had a tightly wrapped piece of tape around its neck. Days later, John Titcomb, an unemployed man who had volunteered to assist in the search, found another parcel wrapped in sacking and tied with a cord. A brick was placed inside the package. Instead of opening it, Titcomb took it to the nearby police stationed at the lockhouse. The parcel contained the heavily decomposed body of a 9-month-old boy. Although there were no external marks, a piece of tape was wrapped around his neck and a handkerchief was stuffed in his mouth. While no definitive cause of death could be determined for either child, a subsequent discovery would leave no doubt that murder had been committed.
On April 10th, Henry Smithwaite was continuing his dragging of the river with assistance from a Sergeant James, close to an area where flotsam and jetsam would gather, when they found another package. A little different to the previous ones, this one was wrapped in a carpet bag tied with string. The top was gaping, and inside they could see brown paper laid over the contents. Officer James cut the string open in the bag. He exposed the body of what would turn out to be a 4-month-old baby girl and a brick. At this point, he headed to the station for further examination, where he found a second body, that of a 13-month-old boy. The boy had the now distinct tape tied around the neck, and the girl had distinct marks as if a similar fate had befallen her. Upon examination at the mortuary, it was determined they were both otherwise healthy at death, well nourished, and even showing the telltale marks of recent vaccination.
In the spring of 1896, the police arrested Arthur Palmer on suspicion of working with Amelia. Arthur was married to Amelia's daughter Mary Ann. Interestingly, he was from Warminster, a place that we've recently done an episode on, actually. They would regularly visit, and on one occasion they arrived with a baby, but would later claim that he had died. Inconsolable, they decided to adopt, which they did through Amelia. A young boy they named Harold.
No, Andy, it's not the doll.
I mean,
I know you're still traumatized.
This is horrible, but it's a good origin story, I guess. They had been paid £12 to look after the 14-month-old boy that was living with them at the time that the police came to arrest Arthur. Arthur proclaimed his innocence, saying, "Very good, I know I'm innocent of it." Amelia and Arthur were brought before a full magistrates at Reading Police Court on April the 11th. Amelia charged again with the murder of this first baby, found Arthur with being an accessory to murder. Upon seeing Arthur in the dock, Amelia was reported to have said, "What's Arthur here for? He's done nothing." Yet they were again remanded for a week to allow the police to investigate the newly found bodies. Amelia and Arthur were now asked if they had any objection, to which she had said, "I don't know." And he said, "I am not guilty."
The mothers of the babies found in the carpet bag had been identified from the letters at Amelia's address and brought to the mortuary to confirm the identities of the babies. Evelina Marmon was unable to contain her grief and also identified a fawn-coloured cloak as being her child's, which was found being used by the Palmer's son Harold. She also confirmed that when she paid the £10 adoption fee, the lady was also carrying the carpet bag that the babies were disposed in. The other, Mrs. Sargent, identified the boy via his clothes that he was found in. At the preceding court trial, that they would stand witness along with the 9-year-old Willie, who was living with Amelia at the time of her arrest. The coroner concluded there was insufficient evidence to convict Dyer, and yet again the case was adjourned, but concluded that it was a very suspicious case.
Amelia had picked up her trade of baby farming in 1868 while working as a nurse at the Bristol Royal Infirmary. Her husband had recently died of diarrhoea when she met Ellen Dane. Ellen would target wealthy women, bring them into her home and help them give birth before offering to take the babies off their hands. By the 1870s, it was finally coming to light that baby farming was a nefarious business. Amelia remarried and moved to Bristol, where she worked at an asylum. To supplement her family's income, she continued to baby farm throughout the 1870s, using numerous aliases such as Stanfield, Harding, Thomas, Weymouth, Thornley and Smith. Her frequent moves helped conceal her activities. In August 1879, an inquest was held in Bristol regarding the death of 2 children farmed to Dyer. These children, along with 3 others who had recently died in her care, including her own son, had succumbed to diseases like diarrhoea, atrophy and convulsions. After attempting to register another death, her doctors became suspicious and reported it to the coroner. Despite the suspicious circumstances, the coroner concluded there was no evidence to convict Amelia. In 1872, the Infant Life Protection Act was passed, requiring individuals taking care of more than one child under 12 months to register with the police. On August 29, 1879, Amelia was charged with violating this act and sentenced to 6 months of imprisonment with hard labour. Despite this punishment, she continued her deadly practices, becoming even more determined to avoid detection, which she managed for decades.
In 1891, a couple returned to collect the baby they left with Amelia, and after she'd sent them on a wild goose chase looking for the supposedly adopted child, the couple had had enough, and they turned up at Amelia's accompanied by a police officer. Fear of legal redress yet again meant that Amelia tried to take her own life on 3 occasions, trying to slit her own throat. She was deemed very violent by her daughter and certified as insane. She was committed to an asylum and released, deemed recovered just 2 months later. Amelia immediately returned to farming and was said by her daughter to be acting rather peculiar. Just before Christmas of 1893, the couple returned yet again looking for their child. Mary Ann got concerned by her mother's behaviour at this point and sent for the doctor, who examined her at her home. He found her to be suffering from delusions and violent behaviour, even lunging at him with a fire poker and threatening to break his skull shortly after he'd arrived to check on her. Amelia then says she's hearing voices telling her to destroy herself. She says, "The birds said, do it, do it." And so yet again, she returned to an asylum for another stint.
Shortly after getting out, the concerned parents once more return looking for news of their child, and this time see Amelia trying to drown herself in a brook. Rescued, she was admitted to the local hospital where she became melancholy, telling the doctor she had something on her mind, but refused to say what. After her recovery and release from the hospital, she returned home, and this is where, in the timeline of events, her daughter married Arthur Palmer, and they all lived together and continued taking in babies. Life was calm for a while until the inevitable return of the couple looking for their child. And as before, a doctor was called shortly after they left. Upon arrival, it didn't take long for the doctor to commit Amelia yet again. She'd been very animated, threatening to throw him out and shouting that God had forsaken her. After a brief spell in an asylum, she entered a workhouse, as her husband at this point had left her and her daughter and son-in-law had moved on.
It was during this stint in the workhouse that she met 74-year-old Jane Smith, otherwise known as Granny, who we met earlier in the story, who was living with Amelia at the time of her arrest. During a stay in a house in Bristol, Amelia brought home a 2-year-old boy named Bertie Palmer.
Wait, I know it's a common name, but is this Bertie Palmer as in the child of her son-in-law?
I couldn't work it out at this point. I know earlier we mentioned that they had a child and they said it had died. So whether this is that child, I couldn't fathom. It could be a different child. So one day she took him for a walk in the park, returning hours later without him. Granny and Amelia then travelled to Cardiff, and Bertie was found wandering the moors alone. An NSPCC officer visited her house to find Amelia had already gone, but speaking to her neighbour, they were told she'd gone to Cardiff to return the boy to his parents. They also learned she'd taken on another baby, a 9-month-old, which she'd been paid £10 for. A fortnight later, a decomposed infant body was found in the River Severn. Neighbours told police she'd had at least 6 children in the house during her brief stay.
A warrant was issued for Amelia's arrest, although this time they knew her as Annie Smith, and Bertie was sent to a workhouse. Amelia never returned to Bristol again. During her time there, many children went missing, but none could be conclusively linked to Amelia, and so her trade was allowed to continue. In 1895, Mary Ann and Arthur adopted a child, a 4-year-old named Queenie. They moved to a house in Devonport under another name, Parsons. Here they would receive a suspicious amount of packages, something that Arthur would explain away to his neighbour as him being a detective who was shadowing a criminal. According to their landlady, Queenie was mistreated, underfed, and was often locked in a room. When Mary and Arthur decided it was time to move on, they left Queenie behind. They told her to look in a shop window, and when she turned around, they were gone. The police issued a warrant for Arthur's arrest for the desertion of a child, but by then they had vanished.
Do you know what? With all the dead babies, I'd find that one of the saddest.
It really is, although
know,
arguably at least she didn't die.
I know, it's just yeah, look over there.
I know. I was like,
What?
do I want to make a horrible joke now? But like, I don't. I really don't.
No, I don't know. That one just hit me a little bit.
Yeah, no, it just got me because I was thinking, do I make a crack about my parents trying to do that to me? And it's like, I can't, you know? It's like, that's horrible.
But it's understandable if your parents did that.
Yeah, that's it. It's the old one, isn't it? It's like, yeah, if you're not quiet, we'll leave you at roadside services like we did your older brother. So what older brother? Exactly. They had moved at this point to live with Amelia in Cardiff alongside Granny, remaining there for 6 weeks, just long enough to adopt a further 3 babies, one of which died of convulsions and diarrhea, although the death was never investigated as they all moved, something they all do a suspicious amount in this story. This time they headed to Caversham to leave more babies in the Thames.
So what happened to one of the children at this point is unclear, as Amelia, Granny, the Palmers, and only one child arrived in Caversham in late August. Soon after, Amelia had headed to London to collect the 9-year-old boy Willie Thornton, and her daughter had adopted a 14-month-old Harold. After a couple of months, the family changed house, remaining in Caversham. At this point, there are 5 children: Willie, Harold, a 2-year-old girl, and 2 further infants. Here, Amelia travelled again to London, taking the girl but returning alone. One of the other babies is actually from my hometown of Swindon, and was adopted by the Palmers but died shortly after by a term known as marabous, which indicates a wasting illness or malnutrition.
Shortly before Christmas 1895, the parties went their separate ways, with the Palmers and Harold moving to Willesden, and Dyer and Granny, along with Willie, finding a new home in Reading.
At the end of January 1896, Amelia adopted another child, 11-year-old Ellen Maud Oliver, known as Nellie. At this time, she starts to use Nellie and the 9-year-old Willie as healthy decoys for the inspections by authorities. Amelia also had a baby and another 3-month-old in her care at this time. And this is also when the lodger mentioned earlier, Mrs. Chandler, moved in with her 2 daughters. Since the previous summer, so less than 6 months, rumours in Caversham were spreading about infants being found in the Thames. Within London, up to 40 bodies had been found. They were often in the water for more than a week when found, and police came to the conclusion they were being thrown upstream some distance from London. They suspected a gang of baby farmers, and there was no evidence to the contrary until the bargeman at the start of this dark tale found the parcel with Amelia's address on it. It was unclear how long it took for police to be on the trail of Amelia. One interview with an undisclosed inspector had reported that infants wrapped in brown paper and clearly having been murdered had been washing up for many months. The interviewee went on to say that they had suspected a woman of the murders, but that they had no leads.
However, after Amelia's arrest, the case's evidence began to mount. The brick found in the carpet bag with Doris and Harry turned out to be one of 3 from the coal house at Amelia's residence. The string and tape from the parcel were also identical to those at the house, and nappies at Dyer's home were identified by Doris's mother as belonging to the child, along with the agreement transferring the baby's care to Amelia, a receipt of £10 paid, and the original advertisement Amelia responded to. Then an important witness came forward saying they had seen Amelia on March the 30th near to where the bargeman had found the body. She was carrying a carpet bag that she struggled with, stopping regularly to rest for breaks. By Friday the 17th of April 1896, it was reported that while waiting for trial, Amelia Dyer had made her will and was preparing for the worst. She reportedly had a considerable amount of money in her bank, which would be left to her daughter, Mary Ann. She had already tried to commit suicide at Reading Police Station using her bootlaces, and after being moved to Reading Prison, she was said to be acting strangely and refusing to take food. She composed a letter in prison to Chief Constable George Tuesley stating, "I do know I shall have to answer before my Maker in heaven for the awful crimes," and then she went on to exonerate her daughter and son-in-law, saying they did not know I contemplated doing such a wicked thing.
On April 18th, the next hearing took place, and the key witnesses, the 2 mothers, were brought forward to formally identify Dyer, with one crying, "That's the dreadful woman to whom I handed my Doris," and the other pointing her umbrella at Dyer and shouting, "That's the vile creature who had the little fellow." In the dock, Dyer seemed very distressed, rocking back and forth. Meanwhile, Arthur was calm and seemed unconcerned. Both were unrepresented. Even though it seems Dyer could have afforded it, she seemed convinced that Arthur wouldn't need a lawyer, as she believed him innocent. One key fact here is, after all the witness testimony and evidence had been presented, the letter Dyer wrote exonerating Arthur and confessing was omitted from the case, and both were yet again remanded for another week. The day after the hearing, Arthur's portrait, which had been circulated by Reading police, arrived in Devonport, where local police linked him to being the man wanted for abandoning a child in care, Queenie Baker, and reissue a warrant for his arrest.
The dredging continued, and on April the 22nd, a piece of tape tied in a knot was found, leading police to fear that there were still more victims in the river. The 23rd of April would see Henry Smithwaite discover yet another package. This one so decomposed the body and head fell to pieces when it was opened at the mortuary. A 12-month-old girl with a telltale tape around the neck and a hanky in the mouth. One piece of the child's clothes had the letters JD on them. A lock of her hair was taken and shown to Granny, who believed it matched a girl named Isaacs, who she called Little Ikey. At the inquest, a witness placed Amelia at the river and discarding a wrapped parcel with details from Granny about abuse on the child were put forward. However, the coroner ended up saying there was no evidence Amelia had murdered the child, only that she had discarded the body in the river. The inquest on the bodies of Doris and Harry were reopened, with new witnesses coming forward and the final verdict being willful murder against Mrs. Dyer.
I mean, that says a lot about the time, doesn't it? That, oh no, she didn't murder the child. She was just throwing his body in the river.
Yeah, that's it. It's a very,
Like,
sort of, yeah, they kind of just, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure like that does well. I mean, as we've seen, sort of that sort of thing would carry a sentence probably, but it would be a lot less, like a lot less than, it's like I imagine that sort of thing's quite normalized.
so for the fourth time in as many weeks, Amelia made another court appearance. As she arrived at the courthouse, she passed through a large crowd that hissed at her. Arthur was again charged with being an accessory. Both now had solicitors, as towards the end of the 19th century, those charged with murder were provided lawyers by the state. Arthur presumably had to pay for his own one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if it wasn't, I guess if it's a sentence that can carry the crime of death, sorry, if it's a sentence of death that sort of the crimes merited that, then yeah, I guess it makes sense that you'd give someone a lawyer for that, just so you weren't sort of seen
But he's
as
only being charged as an accessory, so I guess that's why
yeah,
he'd have to
it's not
pay for
quite
his own.
as yeah, he's probably not going to hang for that.
A brief recap was followed by new witnesses to the grand mound of evidence. We won't go into all of them, but many times over, people see Amelia carrying packages near the river or reporting receiving ads. Mothers who'd given care to their children to Amelia, or whatever name she was using on that particular day, paying fees, that kind of thing. Amelia is reported as looking haggard, keeping her eyes to the ground, whereas Arthur looks unconcerned as usual. Palmer's solicitors asked for his release, to which he was told he will not suffer by being kept in captivity. Again, Amelia's letter was not put forward in court, and another week they were remanded.
Final victim was found on April the 30th at 11:15 a.m. PC Vince of the Berkshire Constabulary was walking along the towpath from the village of Sonning when he spotted a bundle protruding from the reeds, 6 feet from the bank. Attaching a string to a stick, he managed to get the package and rushed it to a nearby pub to grab a boat. The parcel was extremely fragile, so carefully placing it in the boat, he towed it to the police station. It was a well-nourished, blue-eyed boy of 9 or 10 months, wrapped in 2 pieces of pink flannel to form a rope. They estimated that it was 3 to 4 months in the water. It is believed that the previous piece of tape found earlier on was from this body. However, at the inquest, it was decided due to lack of evidence, the verdict was found drowned. Due to lack of the technology for DNA evidence at the time, many of the children went unidentified. At the inquest for what was the baby known as Isaac's, Mary Ann came to give evidence, and so did Isaac's mother. And it turned out the baby's real name was actually Frances Jessie Golding, and Mary Ann had been involved with the acquisition of that child. And so at the end of the day, she was sent to prison alongside her mother for being an accessory.
On May 2nd, 1896, the final trial was held at Reading Police Court. Alfred T. Lawrence led the proceedings, as he had in all previous hearings. After his opening statements, he said there was insufficient evidence to charge Arthur with accessory, and he was formally discharged. Relief on his face and a lighter step as he stepped out to be greeted by Chief Constable Chewsley, who immediately arrested him and charged him with child abandonment, which he was later sentenced to 3 months hard labour for. I like that. It was almost like they held him deliberately the whole time. It was like, we'll hold you,
Get him on that, yeah.
And then right at the end, they're just like, no, we're going to let you go.
I mean, I do have questions about how he seems so unaffected by this, all these descriptions say how calm he was, sort of almost seeming cheerful in the dock.
Yeah.
There's being convinced of your own innocence and having faith in the justice system, and there's also like it's seeming so nonchalant about it all. But this
So
is
the
a guy.
letter,
I was just going to say this is a guy that could then, sort of leave a child by the window who they're caring for and just walk away from them. So, I
yeah.
don't think this guy was right in the head either.
The letter Dyer had written in prison was finally admitted as evidence, despite her defense objecting and saying, and I quote, "It would be like bringing a hammer down to crush a fly and would make the hearing prejudiced." Amelia Dyer was charged with the willful murder of Helena Fry, Doris Marion, and Harry Simmons, and committed her to trial at the Old Bailey. She was transported to Holloway Prison in the meantime.
On the 21st of May, Amelia's final trial at the Old Bailey began. In the time leading up to the final trial, 3 doctors had examined Amelia, concluding that she suffered from insanity, melancholia, and delusions. She's quoted by one doctor as saying, "I know nothing about it, but if I did this, I must have been mad, because I'm so fond of children." The jury retired at 8:30 p.m. and after just 5 minutes returned a verdict of guilty. The judge donned his cap and delivered the death sentence. Her execution would take place on June the 10th.
I don't know why, but even when I was writing this, I felt really like emotional, like at this end of the story. Even though like she's a fucking baby killer, there was still like as she's being taken to
That's
execution,
because
there was
we're
like
not.
emotion.
That's because we're not monsters. It's. I'm not going to get.
Oh,
I'm not going to get into my thoughts on the death penalty, but while she deserves no sympathy whatsoever, um, it is, it's still hard reading a blow by blow account of someone being sentenced to die. I've always thought about that, whenever I've read accounts of people in modern times and historical being sentenced to death.
yeah, yeah. As I say, I found it, I don't know, emotional, I guess, writing it, and now I've got to read it. So here we go. The execution happened behind prison walls away from the mob, as they were no longer done in public. When the chapel bell tolls 9 a.m., Amelia, supported by 2 warders, made her way up the scaffold. With the noose around her neck and a cap over her head, the governor asked if she has anything to say. Dyer replied, "No, sir, I have nothing to say." She did thank him and the warders for their kindness. The hangman drew the bolt, and Amelia plunged to her death. 500 people had gathered outside the prison to see the black flag raised that would signal Amelia's death. There were a few cheers and hisses. So the death toll is actually considered to be much higher than what we've covered here. So although it's bad enough if she's killed 3 babies, which is what she was sentenced for, potentially some people say up to 400 babies, which is estimated based on the number of bodies found in the Thames and other waterways, as well as the numerous reports of missing infants and suspicious deaths connected to Dyer. It's likely some of Dyer's victims were never found. If this number is anywhere near true, it could make Amelia the worst serial killer in British history. The case of Amelia Dyer helped to expose the dangers of unregulated baby farming and led to reforms in child welfare law.
Yeah, it's. Oh, I mean, I'll come back to that in a minute, but I just wanted to add that Mary Ann stood trial, but she was not charged. However, the Palmers, 2 years on, received a 3-week-old baby and a payment of £12. Later, the cold body of the child was found abandoned under the seat of a railway carriage. When she was found, it was revealed she was exhausted, but still alive. Arthur and Mary Ann were sentenced to 2 years hard labour for child abandonment, and after this, they both disappeared from records without a trace.
Yeah, so I've heard theories about Amelia being Jack the Ripper, but don't really buy it. I mean, it's a completely different scenario, right?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot to people that are just around at the same time were murdering people. But I mean, by all accounts, it's not her MO. I don't think this was done out of any compulsion personally to murder babies. Sorry, to as much as to get the money for them. if that makes sense. I mean, obviously she did like doing it, but I don't think it was about the killing. It was,
It's
yeah,
about the money, I think.
yeah, that's it. I mean, but the fact that they're wearing the clothes that they had when they were given to her, to me, that says that she was doing it really quickly with some cases. And I mean, to get through potentially 400, you've got
Well, yeah,
to,
the longer you keep them, the more they cost you, right? So,
well, yeah,
like
exactly.
putting it bluntly, to make money, she needs to get rid of them as quick as possible and reuse clothes and things so that she's not spending that money. Because she never seems to be that wealthy. I know we did mention she had money in the bank at one point, but
Yeah. I
they
mean,
don't live lavishly or anything like that. So it's kind of weird why she does it. It is almost like a compulsion to earn money rather than
yeah.
she's not splashing out in any way.
Because I mean, a 10, 12, 15 quid, it's a lot of money back then, you know?
Yeah, so then there are other theories which seem more likely. So possibly she was part of a bigger network of baby farmers. Um, and there's a theory that like her suicide attempts and her erratic behavior were more done to help her evade the death sentence. But again, I don't really buy that because she was acting that way for years, right? So she would have had to have done that like with a level of foresight.
I mean, anyone that is gonna, I mean, this is a fucking heavy topic, you know? I mean, this is no amount
It's
of
Halloween,
Bluey,
man.
no amount of Bluey, no amount. Like, you know, this kind of dwarfs what, you know, sort of, I miss talking about 17th century and 18th century, like, farmers getting ripped apart by wolves. You know, it's like, you know, that we've covered the Hungerford massacre, we've covered all sorts of nasty things, but this is, you know, you might notice that, you know, we didn't really joke around in this as much as we do in any other episode, because it is just it is like the worst thing, isn't it? And I think that goes back to Amelia, where you can't, you know, you can't do that kind of thing, even if it's for the money, even if you're the greediest person on earth. Just the act of killing a child like that, let alone dozens or hundreds of times, you know, you can't be right in mentally. You know, I don't think they were. I don't think they were faked. I don't think they were staged.
Yeah,
Uh,
and yeah, I think that's how I originally came across Amelia was I was considering doing like a Jack the Ripper, which has been done a lot.
we'll do
So
it one
this
day.
one,
We'll go to Whitechapel. We'll cheese it up. But
I've got books on it, but yeah, I just thought this one was maybe a bit less known and it's still within the Wessex realm, if you like.
yeah, with Bristol and Reading, and I mean the thing is, like, we say the most prolific, sort of the worst serial killer in British history. I think that's got to be one of the worst. If it is up to 400, that's got to be one of the worst in world history, right?
I don't know.
Maybe that's something I need to look up, but you know,
I mean, I can do that.
but yeah, it's really, I mean, yeah, it's not something to you
I
can
mean, Shipman,
I mean,
English
this
Doctor,
out this outstrip
284.
this outstrip. I was thinking of Shipman. This outstrips Shipman by far if it is 400. Because
There's
I mean,
a
not all of Shipman's are confirmed, are they?
no, there's a Pedro Lopez who's a Colombian, Peruvian, Ecuadorian serial killer with a victim count over 300.
Again, if it is up
Um,
to 400, you know,
Even though they're dropping quite rapidly. Then there's Javeed Iqbal, who is a Pakistani serial killer with a possible count of 100. There's Mikhail Popkov, a Russian serial killer with a possible count of over 86. Daniel Camargo Barbosa was a Colombian, Ecuadorian, Brazilian serial killer with a possible count of 180.
so
And
yeah, I mean, if it is 400, then by the
what
sounds of
about what about the one who was only just sentenced like last year
whereabouts,
in England? The nurse.
Oh yeah. I don't think it was. There was a lot, but I don't think it was that many.
That was babies too, right?
I think so. Yes.
Lucy Letby. Convicted of killing 7 and attempting to kill 6 others.
Is there any others that are supposed victims or?
Yeah, there's additional conviction in 2024, convicted of attempting to kill a premature baby girl. Yeah. But I mean, definitely whatever is never going to be 400.
No.
So
I think that is actually ongoing at the moment. I think.
yeah, I mean, there's still stuff going on in the news from her now, to be honest.
Yeah, they're
There's
they're
not,
looking. I think they're trawling between her time at one of the Liverpool hospital, actually, when she was there to see if there were any unexpected and unexplained deteriorations in like sort of child's health that indicates like a killing or an attempted killing. But yeah, as said, by the sounds of it, if it is that many, if it is 400, then that does put her as the worst serial killer in history.
that was discovered and trialed and
This is
sentenced.
true. Maybe there's more that have got away with it, and I guess it's you know,
How would you define murder? Like,
how you define a serial killer. Like, could you put dictators up there? I mean, but yeah, in terms of the
yeah,
out of sight under the law, not because when dictators do it, they make the law, so it's not really serial killing anymore, is it?
well, this got deep. Happy
It
Halloween,
did. It did.
folks.
Yeah, damn. But yeah, so that is a very dark topic. Again, normally we'll at the end of these we'll talk about the case a little bit and talk about what we feel about it. But I think there's only one thing to think about this, really, isn't there?
And another beer.
Looking plenty. Um, but yeah, and it's the fact.
Yeah.
Another thing that strikes me as well is the fact that she didn't. In the court, if she was trying to get away with it, she'd be acting a lot more erratic in the court, whereas she wasn't. Once she was there, it was like she was resigned to it. There was a little feeble attempt of, I wouldn't do that. I couldn't imagine doing that.
I think
But
there's a little bit with these people of almost relief, like you're killing, you're killing, you're killing, and it's like, oh, yeah, almost grateful that you've been caught because you can stop because it's like a compulsion, right? So
yeah,
like,
that's it. And you do hear that a lot. There is that relief. Sometimes it's because they want to be recognized. Sometimes it's straight up ego and pride almost. But in a lot of cases, you'll find that it's actually like, as you say, it's a compulsion to do it, and they can't
yeah.
stop themselves from doing it, and they sort of want to be caught, but they can't let themselves be caught. But sometimes they do. Sometimes they'll deliberately start getting sloppy. Um, yeah, I don't know. I always segue to weird news from that. That's fucked me up.
So yeah, you were questioning how we would get from Amelia Dyer to some light-hearted weird news.
Yeah. What have you got?
So so mum and cult follower die after ritual birth went wrong during horror live stream.
Oh, good to see we're keeping it light and cheery with the weird news. That is not something you hear every day.
No, and it's from today's news.
Shit, today. I,
Yeah, stumbled upon this. It seemed a bit graphic. I hesitated to do it, but then I thought I'll do it, and then I realized we were doing Amelia Dyer, so it is a bit of a double whammy. But
in for a penny, in for a pound. Get it all out of the way here.
yeah, so there was a one at the beginning of the episode, but this is pretty graphic, and the other one was Victorian. This is current, so you have been warned. A woman who was part of a bizarre cult that ordered its followers to live stream their home births has died in agony just hours after delivering her baby. A young woman known only as Lydia tragically died in agony hours after live streaming her home birth at the behest of her cult leader. The incident took place on September 8th in a house in Plazy in the Plzeň region of the Czech Republic. 12 hours post delivery, Linda and her newborn remained connected by the umbilical cord, a practice purportedly carried out for spiritual reasons, but one that significantly increases the risk of infection. As the hours passed, Linda's condition deteriorated rapidly, and she was rushed to hospital the following day in a critical state. Doctors diagnosed her as brain dead, and she was subsequently declared deceased. The infant, however, remains in hospital care.
At
The
least,
residents. Hmm?
sorry, I was just gonna say, at least they survived.
The residence where the birth occurred served as the headquarters for the cult Life in the Heart, which attributed Linda's death to grey-haired demon.
As you do.
Lucas S. 46, the self-proclaimed leader who broadcast the birth to his followers on YouTube, offered a strange explanation for the fatal event. He bizarrely stated, in an embrace with Linda, the grey hag, through her, told me without words, just through experience, when it's born, I will drown it, said the grey hag, who is in all women. These are demons that influence us, turn us off, and enter our lives so that we don't live with love. That's how it is. Lucas, a member of the cult, detailed how he and others attempted to revive Linda, but their efforts were in vain. He said, I tried to wake her up, looked into her eyes, but she didn't respond. I slapped her face. She was like dead, as if she'd been underwater for 20 days. Her partner and the baby's father, Marion, called emergency services, and we followed the instructions. We laid her in the hallway and started chest compressions. We kept massaging her, but she showed no signs of waking up. Police were also summoned to the scene alongside paramedics, and an investigation into Linda's death is now underway. A police spokesperson stated, we have initiated criminal proceedings on suspicion of a crime of causing bodily harm through negligence. Local residents claim they know little about the cult and tend to avoid its members. They revealed that Lucas S. moved into the house approximately a year ago. One neighbor commented, they're crazy, they even go barefoot to the stores. Another added, the house belongs to the father of the child. He's a local, bought it on a mortgage. He's a smart guy, an IT professional, but he's lost his mind. They continued, usually it's quiet. We don't know much about them, but sometimes they throw a party and disturb the area, but mostly we ignore them. We want nothing to do with them. The investigation continues. Happy Halloween!
I mean, I had a couple. I had a yeah. That's kind of the one I was going to go with is quite light-hearted, but I feel I've got to match it now. But
You can go light-eyed, that's fine.
well,
I am, thank you.
actually, I think I'm going to go with a slightly less light-hearted one, but kind of also tying into the story. And the conversation we had just afterwards. This is from TMZ.com. And Zach Baggins,
Bilbo Baggins.
not quite. His disturbing
Greatest
collection
little hobbit of them all.
All right, Leonard. So Zach Baggins is the star of a show called Ghost Adventures, and his collection of memorabilia just got even creepier as he revealed he now owns the remains of notorious serial killer Samuel Little.
Never heard of him.
He told TMZ that his haunted Las Vegas museum is now home to the fully sealed remains of Little, one of the most prolific serial killers in US history, with 93 confessed victims. Zach tells us over the weekend he also received Little's portfolio of hand-drawn portraits of his victims, along with his prison belongings from the time of his death. That includes everything from clothes and shoes to a TV, hygiene items, and even his art kit. He snagged the haunted hall from Little's biographer, Julian Lauren, who's loaning them to the museum indefinitely. She spent tons of time with Little while penning Behold the Monster, confronting America's most prolific serial killer when he died in 2020. He named her his sole beneficiary as he didn't have any family. Zach is going to display everything inside the serial killer's exhibit room behind actual prison bars next to Charles Manson's ashes and bone fragments. And the display went up 2 days ago by the looks of it.
Go.
Oh, yeah. If anyone wants to go and see what's left of these serial killers, there's a museum in Las Vegas where you can do it all, apparently.
Hmm.
I admit I'd not heard of Sam Little,
No, I haven't.
but 93 victims, so not quite Amelia Dyer, but they're all victims he's confessed to killing as well.
Yeah, so a bit more confirmed. Amelia's not confirmed
Yeah.
400.
So yeah, as I said, he died in 2020. I've just looked up a bit more. I do recognize the name. He confessed to committing 93 murders between 1970 and 2005. Um, and the police also confirmed there's evidence for at least 60 of them being definitely his killings. Um, so it is the largest number of confirmed victims for any serial killer in US history. Um, yeah, I guess this has been all about horrible stuff and serial killers.
Yeah, cheerful episode.
Yeah. Can we do?
Actually,
Sorry, go on.
go on. I was gonna say actually there is one thing I was gonna mention which is a bit lighter.
Go on.
Um, I have a Loch Ness story
You do.
from today.
All right, good. Cheer me up before I go to bed.
Uh, yeah, so this one's in the Mirror.
Hmm.
Beach walker captures video of new Loch Ness monster in stunning 20-minute sighting.
Wait, new Loch Ness monster, as in like this is a different Loch Ness monster to the old one.
Yeah, I had to read this twice because I was like, wait, what?
So
So
it's not
yeah,
Nessie anymore. Is it like Lil Ness? I don't know. Just
yeah, like Lil Wayne, but Lil Ness.
Lil Nas.
But the issue I have with this is that this case is in Ireland and not Loch Ness, which means it's not the Loch Ness monster.
Hence the term new Loch Ness monster.
Yeah. So Dean BT uploaded footage of a long-necked beast he spotted a few dozen yards offshore. So it's in the sea, which is more believable. Says the Irish version of the Loch Ness monster. Beachcomber in Ireland claims to have captured footage of a sea beast that could give Scotland's famed Nessie a run for her money. Dean Beattie, a 31-year-old barber, was stunned to spot a mysterious long-necked creature bobbing in the water a short distance from the shore. The flabbergasted hairdresser managed to film the enigmatic figure momentarily before his phone battery gave up the ghost. The video snippet seems to show a sizable serpentine entity with its head above the waterline. It happened off the coast of Donegal, and he says it looks exactly like the original pictures of the Loch Ness monster.
Wow.
Right, let me show you the image.
Very, very similar to.
But does it not make you think of someone with their arm going?
Or like a bird with its head out the water.
Or a whale?
At least
Could be a Russian spy.
could be a Russian spy. Yeah. Better shoot it.
Wow, you brought that back to dark. I was trying to end on a light note. On that note,
Yes.
yeah, follow us on social media at Wyrd Wessex. You can still get hold of our new Halloween merch, which is the Kernabbas Giant. So this guy, if you're watching, but with a pumpkin head. That's
This guy right here.
with a pumpkin head. Yeah, join our Patreon. Help us to keep the lights on, as it were.
Running out of candles.
Yeah. The Cult of the Weird Facebook group as well, if you want to join the not discussion. Yeah.
And next time we promise to have a slightly less depressing episode, I should imagine.
Yeah. We're working on it. We're working on it.
Yeah, well, I don't think it could get much worse than this one in terms of subject matter. So,
Challenge accepted. I'm off to write.
oh no. Well, while he's doing that, I'm gonna go and stock up on beer and episodes of Bluey and things like that. So that's all from us. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time,
Stay weird.
God damn it. My fucking line.